The first question I ask about any game that I am interested in playing is, does it have fishing? This sounds like a joke, and it kind of is, but really it's not. I love a fishing minigame, and I'm way more likely to play a game if I know it has fishing in it. And that's why today I'm going to be talking about fishing mechanics in video games. This is going to be another video where I explore a popular game feature. I've done roguelites in the past, I've done auto battlers in the past, and then I've also talked about UI kind of as a little deep dive like this. So we're going to talk about what kinds of fishing minigames are there and what makes them fun. How are they different in ways that I think are better or worse? And as always, these are my opinions based on games that I've played. If you disagree, that's fine, honestly. To gather info for this video, I went through all the games I could think of that had a fishing minigame in them that I was at least familiar with, and most of these are ones that I have played. And there were a lot. I'm sure there are games that I've forgotten here, and I know there are a few I just couldn't remember how the fishing worked, which is why I don't talk about it in detail. But I've played a lot of games with fishing mechanics, and I think I've enjoyed most of them, if not all of them. If you've played a game with a really good fishing mechanic, let me know what it was. As I looked through all these games, I came to the conclusion that fishing minigames are all basically the same. Nothing really crazy is happening, but the mechanics they use are on this spectrum of complexity. So on one side of the spectrum, we have fishing minigames that are so simple that they basically don't exist. One example of this is the fishing in ooblets. The fishing basically happens automatically. You can choose between different types of bait, but otherwise you literally just hit the fish button. Well, it's called seed dangling. You cast, you get something, the end. There's no more interaction other than pressing the button. And then on the other side of the spectrum is the fishing in Final Fantasy XIV, which my account is actually not active right now. I'll see if I can get some footage, but I just might not have it. But the Final Fantasy fishing system is an entire profession in the game. Now they have professions that are as complex, basically, as the fighting classes. I played a lot of fishing in Final Fantasy, and I got very deep into this progression. You have different bait, different locations, different weather effects, fishing rods, gear, player skill levels, and then on top of all of that, that's factoring in what you can catch and when and where. You also have different actions you can take as you're fishing. It's not just cast and reel. There's all these different things you can do to give yourself buffs, or to make the chance of a different fish more likely, or to make it more likely that you'll actually catch the fish when you reel it in. It's very complicated. It's the most complicated fishing mechanic that I've seen, at least in a game that wasn't entirely about fishing. And then in that spectrum of simple to complex fishing mechanics, we have subgroups that I've come up with of games that are all kind of similar to each other. The first subgroup I'm calling Simple Cast and Reel, and this is all games where you simply cast your rod and then reel in the fish, and there's not anything you need to do between those moments to make your chances of catching the fish more or less likely. There's usually different locations where you can cast, but the minigame is always the same and it doesn't require any thought. These are games like older Harvest Moons or Story of Seasons. I realize in the new Story of Seasons they do have like a line tension based minigame, but in old ones you literally just pressed A and reeled in the fish. Animal Crossing, Pokemon, World of Warcraft, Ooblets, Hades, which has a fishing minigame, and probably dozens more, have this very simple cast your rod. There's usually a timing component of when you reel. Usually you have to get it within a certain, like a second or so in order to reel it in, or you'll miss it. But occasionally they don't even make you do that, and you literally just press the button to reel it in. And looking closely at these simple fishing minigames and what they are at their core reveals, I think, what we like about fishing. Most of us don't care about intricate details of selecting equipment, gauging the time of day and where we're casting, utilizing a careful reeling strategy to outsmart the fish. We don't want to think about any of that. We want it to be like a slot machine. We press the button and maybe we get a fish. It's a little surprise, and sometimes we get an extra special fish, which is like hitting a jackpot. So this type of mini game, this very simple one, is not only the most common because it's the easiest to implement, but also because it gets the job done. It scratches that itch of, casting your line and seeing what you get. It's that little surprise, the little bonus, and I think that's all you really need for a fun fishing mini game. And then we get into slightly more complicated mini game. The next group I'm calling is reeling with extra steps. In these fishing mini games, usually you have to do something while reeling in the fish that's not quite as straightforward as just pressing a button. Usually this is explained away by saying that there's like tension on the line, or that you need to tire out the fish, or something like that. So these are games like Dinkum, Palia, Cult of the Lamb, Graveyard Keeper, and Stardew Valley, which I believe have the same mini game, and new Story of Season games. So these mini games all have the same core functionality as the simple cast and reel, but by adding something that you have to like either manage the direction or the tension of the line, this makes the player feel just a little bit more like they earned that fish. Instead of it just being like a yes or no sort of lucky pull, it feels like the player's skill earned them a reward. Because usually, even though the fish spawn is related on luck, whatever the game happened to spawn there, whether or not you succeed at the minigame, in this case, is based on your skill. And this category is where you have to be careful as a game developer, because as you increase the effort of fishing, you run the risk of making it too much work, and it also adds the possibility that unskilled players are going to lose fish repeatedly and get a little upset. People don't like to be bad at things. And if you make this minigame too precise or require a lot of very careful movements or a fast reaction time, you end up making it more trouble than it's worth. And if fishing is not necessary to the main game, players may choose to ignore it completely, or they just might be mad about it. I personally encountered this problem in Palia myself, where it's extremely rare to find an epic rarity fish, and then once you hook it, the minigame also gets much harder. So not only is it rare to find it, but it's much harder to keep it once you've found it. And even with the upgraded version of the fanciest fishing rod, I have hooked and lost 2 extremely rare fish on different occasions. And that didn't feel good. Especially at this point, I've caught hundreds of fish in Palia. I'm very familiar with the minigame, and I've tried to play it very cautiously when these rare fish come up, because I know it's hard. But it's just incredibly precise. If you reel when it's outside the little circle, even for like a second, your line breaks. It's so fast. With the upgrade, it's so fast, and it's very frustrating because there's nothing I can do as a player to increase the chance of a rare fish, and there's also nothing I can do to make this like epic rarity fish easier to reel in. So I'm just kind of stuck. Like at this point, I'm having to get lucky, and that's not a good feeling when the minigame up until this point has not been very hard at all. So nobody likes to feel like they don't have anything that they can do to succeed at a game that they're having trouble with. It starts to feel a little bit unfair, especially when, a part of the feature is based on actual random chance. That makes it feel even more unfair, and nobody likes that. So I think it's a good idea to be careful about how difficult you make the sort of most difficult version of your minigame. And if you can, add something into the game where players who have put a lot of effort into a particular system can bring that system down to a challenge level that they're comfortable with. Because remember, this is supposed to be fun, it's not supposed to be frustrating. Now the next and last category that I found for fishing minigames is extremely rare because it's a lot of work, especially when the fishing mechanic is not central to the game, and I'm calling this category action-packed fishing. And I call it action-packed not because it's fast-paced like an action film, but because there are many different actions that you can take while fishing. that will impact the results of the fishing minigame. I could only find one game that fits in this category that wasn't a game about fishing, and that's Final Fantasy XIV. But I'm also including Dredge in this category, which is a fishing game. And then I think, based on what I've seen, I think Dave the Diver probably fits in this category too, but I haven't played it, so I'm not sure. But basically, this kind of mini game gives the player more choice in how they approach the fishing. So Dredge, which I love, if you know me, I love Dredge, 2023 game of the year for me. And in Dredge, there are a lot of different kinds of mini games based on the type of fish you're catching. And there's different ways to interact within those mini games. So you get these prompts to press your action button at a certain time, but sometimes you can wait for a trophy node to show up, the yellow instead of the green. But what you can do is you can choose to fish more slowly in order to get a trophy to show up, which is one choice you can make, an action you can take. Or you can just go straight out the bat, get the minigame done as fast as you can. But even if you miss your actions, it doesn't make you lose the fish, it just makes the fish go slower. So you lose daylight, you have less of a chance to do more fishing. But I really like how flexible and still fairly simple this minigame is. And there's enough variety between the minigames that it doesn't feel like you're just doing the same thing again and again for 15 hours or however long Dredge is. But there's some that go like around a circle, there's some that expand from the middle. The dredging minigame itself, the titular dredging minigame, is like a little obstacle dodge game where you just swap between these lanes, which I think is pretty fun. And they're not too fast, it's not a test of your reaction time. It has a very cozy feeling to it, but it's not so simple that it's boring to repeatedly do as you make your way through the game. I just think it's really well done. I liked it a lot, the sounds are good, everything about the minigame feels good to do. It's just perfect. And while I did get really into the Final Fantasy XIV fishing, I think it could have been simplified. You get a lot of different skills that it's not always clear when or how you're supposed to use them. Basically, the way that I did fishing in Final Fantasy XIV and how I think a lot of people did it was that I would just Google the kind of fish I was trying to catch, check the time of day, and then check the actions recommended for that kind of fish, and do that. There was a lot of complexity around the fishing, but I wouldn't actually experiment with them. I didn't make a lot of choices during the fishing minigame about what I wanted to do. It was more, I know from other people's experience that this is how you get this fish. And I think that can be a problem when you want a game that's going to immerse your player, that's going to get them in that good flow state. If they can't figure something out in the game, if there's not feedback there to help them understand what they need to do, they're going to have to stop and look it up on a wiki or ask a friend, and then they're breaking that immersion. So I think it's much better to give the player in-game feedback for when a certain action or tool is appropriate, and with any feature, really, not just fishing, if the player uses something that is not effective for what they're trying to do, the game should let them know somehow so that they can correct their course. And this is actually another problem I had with Palia, which on the whole, I enjoyed the fishing a lot, but it had these little problems that kind of made the entire feature not as fun. And that is that it's not really clear what is possible to catch inside or outside the fishing nodes. So they have these little starry fishing nodes, and they give you a higher chance of getting a starred fish. I think that's mentioned somewhere in the tutorial, and I don't know if it's possible to catch a starred fish without the node, or you need the node to catch the starred fish. And I've tried to look this up, I've tried to talk to people. I have seen some wiki pages that claim that it's impossible. A lot of them don't mention it at all. And then while I personally have not caught a starred fish from normal water, like in weeks and months, I have friends who swear that they have. So it's a very murky situation, and the game is not helping me understand where these certain fish are even available, where they come from, and how to get them. And that's a problem. Without feedback on what's possible or information about how certain mechanics work, the only way that I can learn how something works is to test it out myself and hope that I get the results that I want. And if I spend a lot of time doing something fruitless because I don't understand how it works, I'm left feeling like I wasted my time instead of feeling like I enjoyed a video game. And I think a lot of games help with this by, for example, Dredge offers an encyclopedia for the fish that gives hints on what kind of equipment you need and where the fish are located. And the entries are not complete, so there's still that little bit of surprise. And when you're fishing, you're not quite sure what you're going to get, but it tells you where to look to find the answers to what you need. And you know if you're missing a fish in this area and it's only available at night, you know to go check that area, and eventually you discover the fish that you were missing. And in the end, there are a lot of ways to do a very complicated, involved fishing minigame, and I think it can be really enticing. As a developer, you want to make something really cool and get into the nitty gritty and just like wow people with your extra features. But I would recommend, before you get thigh deep in your fishing waders, ask yourself a few questions. First, is this adding to the game experience, or is it just adding complexity? I think this is an important thing to consider. It helps if you have someone else who's a little bit distanced from the game, like a friend, a beta tester of some sort, to ask them if it's something that they want in the game that you're making. Because sometimes it's not adding to the game experience, it's just making more work, and nobody wants that. The second one is, how am I going to give the player information about how this complexity works so that it's satisfying when they use it? So thinking in advance about the problems that I've mentioned with complicated fishing systems and seeing if there's ways you can get around them before they happen. And then the last question, the one that's really going to make you face the truth: would this game still be fun if I just did a simple cast and reel minigame? Because let's face it, dev time is dev money. We don't want to spend time developing features if they aren't actually going to make the game more fun, or better, or more engaging, or whatever yardstick we want to measure it by. And as we can see from the very long list of hugely successful games that have simple, afterthought fishing mechanics, it's okay to go simple. If it's not the core feature of your game, it's not going to hurt anything for the fishing to be very simple, especially when you have a lot of other features that the player can engage with. So obviously for my game, fishing is the game. So I'm gonna have to do something that makes it a fulfilling experience, with fishing being the main mechanic. But if you're just looking for ideas for a game that's not about fishing, that just has fishing in it, this is a good question to really think about. I think there's a lot of evidence that the simple cast and reel minigame is plenty fun. A lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people, in fact, don't like all the line tension minigames that things like Stardew Valley and, well, that's the main one. A lot of people I've heard do not like the Stardew Valley fishing minigame because it's just a little bit fiddly, you know what I mean? And so with all these different types of fishing minigames, we still have to answer the question, what makes a fishing game fun at all in the first place? What's the real thing that makes it so fun? And as I kind of hinted at, I think the answer is most clearly visible in the simple version of the fishing mechanic. We cast our line into the unknown and we pull out a prize. The inherent randomness of fishing, with the potential of getting something really special, creates anticipation. It creates this hope. Maybe this cast is going to be the one where we get that big fish, or that special fish, or whatever it is, the shiny Magikarp that we're trying to get. And then if you add to this the little bits of choice that we have, where we can choose a location, we can choose the bait, we can fish at a certain time of day in the game. All of this gives us a little bit of control over the game, over the outcome, without ruining the surprise. And going back to the slot machine comparison, for this game mechanic, repetition is not a bad thing. In fact, repetition in a lot of different forms can be very calming and deeply satisfying. I mean, think about like Minecraft. The core feature of Minecraft, just digging things up out of the ground, sometimes landing on a diamond. Repetitive tasks, while in some cases they can be boring, in specific cases like fishing, like mining, like running, you know, for our real human bodies, these things can be very nice. It's just important to make sure that the effort and the rewards are balanced and that there's enough variety to keep it exciting, at least for a little while. Now, one thing that will happen, once someone has found everything there is to fish up in your game, they're probably going to stop fishing. And that's not a bad thing. Most games have a logical endpoint. It's natural. All things must die, as they say. The trick is to make sure that there's enough in the game to make the player feel like they've gotten the value that they were expecting. And I know I've talked about this before, but games are not supposed to be played forever. Some games are cyclical, you know, like Tetris. You could theoretically play Tetris forever, but you know, most games are not intended to be fun forever, day after day, hour after hour, without some kind of additional content. And I think that this is not an exception, you know? At some point they're going to run out of things to fish up, and that's going to be it. And that's okay. And the amount of content that the player will expect will be different depending on what other things are in your game. So, like in Cult of the Lamb, most of the game is not about fishing. So they've just got a couple, like 5 different kinds of fish. It's a very simple little mini game, and it's fine. It feels fun. It's a little whimsical to catch fish and cook them up and feed them to your followers. And then in other games like Dredge, where fishing is the main mechanic, you want dozens of fish, and then in Dredge's case, variations on those fish and trophies of those fish. And then you have a good amount of variety that's going to keep surprising the player and giving them more things to do while they're working their way through the story, which I think was about 15 hours. You can also connect your fishing progression to the progression of the rest of the game if you think it makes sense in the game that you're making. Like MMOs do this, where you need to advance your character and the quest progression in order to unlock new zones. And then once you have those new zones unlocked, you can go fishing in them. You've got a whole set of fish to catch in those new zones, and you could just sort of keep doing that until the end of the game. So when you connect them, then it sort of extends the lifespan of both, because as you go, you have this new content that unlocks for the main portion of the game and then also for the fishing portion of the game. And this is done in different ways. Like in Pokemon, you have to advance to a certain point to get the new fishing rods. In like World of Warcraft, you have to get to those new areas and be high enough level that you won't just die. In Dredge, you can go everywhere from the beginning, but you need to unlock the appropriate equipment to actually fish there. So instead of having an area lock, it's an equipment lock. You can also use skill levels based on like XP. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and games do this in different ways. But that's just another way to get a little bit more mileage out of a fishing mechanic by connecting it to these other things. So all of these things, and I'm sure some other things that I forgot to touch on here, come together to make a great fishing minigame. And I personally love the fact that a lot of games have a fishing minigame hidden in it somewhere. I hope game devs keep it up. I will die on this hill that fishing minigames always make a game better, and they are second only to my other favorite game mechanic, which is the ability to have a pet companion. So I guess the first question I have for games that come out is, can you get a dog in this one? And then the second question is, can you go fishing? But I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown. I'm going to be sifting through all of this as I design my fishing mechanic for my game, which, as I mentioned, since it's the core mechanic, it will be on the more complicated side, but maybe not as complicated as you would expect, based on what I've learned here. But either way, I'm excited. I'm excited to get into the meat of the fishing game, the actual fishing, and start seeing my little project come together. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos about games, development, creativity, whatever else I feel like talking about, any future devlogs for the fishing game that I'm working on, because I'll be back soon with another video, and I hope to see you there. Bye bye!